Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. It is Monday. We're going to start a new theme this week, this one being Eastern music, sort of a very broad and vague term there, but primarily we check out a lot of Western music, very European and American music on the channel, and I wanted to explore some music from the other part of the world. So we're primarily going to be looking at music this week from Africa and Asia. Now today, I don't know how I get talked into this stuff. We're checking out a 44-minute track from Boris. This one called Feedbacker, which gives me all sorts of fears. Together, 44 minutes, Boris, Feedbacker. I'm just expecting noise, possibly drone. Boris is a group that bounces off of me more often than not. However, I appreciate their artistic integrity. They do some really cool things with sound, even if it's not generally a fun time for me listening to them. And so I'm kind of, 50-50 on this, a little apprehensive to dive into it, but I know I'm going to find something interesting regardless, even if I don't enjoy my time with this song. Now, this song is broken up into 5 parts, 5 tracks. It comprises the entire album. From what I understand, the song itself is not broken up at all. So we're going to listen to all 5 parts in one shot, all 44 minutes. I'll be taking notes on my whiteboard and we'll discuss it after that. So as usual with these lengthy songs, grab a snack, get some water, make sure you stay hydrated, find a comfy seat, and let's dive in and see what Boris is bringing to the table today. As I was expecting, a lot of feedback. I'm curious if we're going to have an Earth 2 situation here where it's just 45 minutes of drone. Regardless, we are off to a slow start, very much feeling the moment. I did like the intro, though, the very low hum, the volume swell after that, having the higher tones of the guitar fade out until we get just that low hum again. I thought that was a very neat transition there at like minute 115 or something. So we do have some sort of movement. I wonder if it would make more sense if it were a bit faster. but there are notes and chords being chosen for some reason. There's just too much distance between them for me to really piece all of it together to see what the relationship is between all these chords. I was expecting a release from that tension, just those two notes quickly moving back and forth. Alright, so I can follow along with movement like that. It goes where I expect it to. It's just it takes so long to get to each next step of an idea. And that's what I meant with, like, even the chords. There's so much space between the strums themselves. Interesting. I think they're playing blues rock, just heavily saturated with fuzz and distortion. Of course, accompanied with, for lack of a better word, noise. Part 1 is definitely just feedback. There is music here, it's just at such a slow tempo, or maybe you can just envision it as very long held out notes at a decent tempo. Will they continue this into part 2? Okay. That first chord was dissonant. Now it's still a slower tempo here. The song is not too interested in moving forward too quickly, but we have direction. As usual with slower tempos like this, it's really difficult to keep a perfect time. And we can hear little dips here and there, particularly coming in behind the beat a little bit. I love all the little ghost notes on the drum too. Like driving on a highway, middle of the night, windows down, no car in sight, just you, the wind in your hair, and the road. What's interesting is if we understand this as a very, very slow 4/4, we'll actually find snare on the backbeat, 2 and 4. 1, bass kick, 2, 3, bass kick, 4 is your snare. So we let the guitar line sort of float, and it crashes back down to earth. There's actually a 3-pulse in here, particularly on the guitar. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. I thought I heard a little bit of an accelerando there, but it might have just been some temporary rushing. Yeah, the cymbals engaged in that 3-pulse. I do like that guitar that's been giving us this lead melody for a while. Very cool mixture of pre-composed melody, harmony alongside what might even be right up on the spot with sonic experimentation. Some of that blues rock stuff I was picking up in portions of part 1 really on full display here. Is that compression artifacts on the cymbals? vocals. I was not expecting that. Again, the ghost notes. I love them. Second time there's been a reverb that's been out of sync with the core pulse of the song, and it's come from the drums both times. It's interesting that we end on something so flowy, given that we just came out of a section that was so oh, okay, so they went back to the heaviness. Away from the blues rock and into metal? Hearing that high-end EQ just pierce through this. Okay. What? Picked up the sample. We have something grooving now. Got momentum. We're still in 3 though. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. very apparent. It's almost kind of grungy, actually, with the chords, some of the noisy elements, the vocal delivery, and note choices. When did this come out? 2003, okay. So many layers of just sound. Go again, another wall of sound. Few intrusive frequencies in this as well, just piercing sounds that are not fun to listen to. Now I'm gonna turn the volume down on my end. I'm not changing the volume for y'all. Y'all are welcome to do that. This is just, it's too much. It really is. Part of me actually forgot the song started out as feedback. Parts 2 and 3 went into some really cool ideas, and I completely forgot this is called feedback here. So here we are, back in the thick of it. Who keep finding higher overtones. That's ridiculous. So this is the same snare part from movement 1. Okay. Yeah, where we had the snare on 2 and 4. So that's going to be what this is then. The drum part from movement 1 with the overtone feedback of movement 4. Actually, I think those chords in the background are also from part 1. Oh, that actually works rather nice. It's not exactly respectful to the song, but that piercing overtone is only in the right channel. So you can actually hear the melodic guitar if you just take that off. And there's the ghost note rolls from the end of part 1. I don't recognize that guitar though. That's sending 3 notes. That might be new. And what would it be without 30 seconds of feedback to wrap it up? Alright. I find it interesting. If I were to break this down into a very unfavorable overview of this track, we would have a 3-minute grunge song sandwiched between 2 noisy, eclectic, atmospheric explorations. Because there is a 4.5 minute song in part 3 that is very traditional in structure and composition. It has vocals in it, which we don't really see much else except for the very end of part 2. But even the noise, I think, shows up in a maybe not necessarily a palatable way, but a constructive way that pairs well with the grungy sound they're going for. They have slightly angsty vocals to it, having a lot of grit and compression to the music works well with that. But outside of that, just prior to that, we have 10 minutes of feedback, followed by a 15-minute bluesy rock jam session with noise surrounding that. And after it, we have 13 minutes of wall of sound, high-pitched noise. Like I said, it's not a very favorable read, and it's not one that I think is really worth digging into, but I do think it's interesting to bring up. That it almost feels like this song exists in 3 parts: an experimental intro, a very traditional middle, and an experimental outro. I think this comes into very clear view when you realize that parts 4 and 5 might as well just be one part, since part 5 is only 3 minutes long, and it consists of basically the trailing off of the noise of part 4, and part 1 actually moves into part 2. They're only different in their approach, where one is pure feedback and the other one is music on top of feedback. I don't think it would be that big of a stretch other than having a 22-minute first part to this song. To say that this could be viewed very well within just 3 movements rather than 5. But again, I think that's sort of the end of that conversation there, unless you want to get into gatekeeping and what is art and what should be music and stuff like that. And I don't feel like those conversations are worthwhile. I just think it's interesting to sort of look at it from that perspective. Now, movement 1. I don't really have anything to say about this. Y'all heard it. It's just a lot of feedback. Eventually we get chords strummed rather slowly. It presents us a very slow 4/4, probably somewhere in the 20 to 30 BPM. Eventually I started to pick up a much brisker 3/4 in there that the guitars leaned into, and eventually the cymbals picked up in part 2. Maybe it was towards the end of part 1 where the cymbals leaned into that. Regardless though, the song moves at a very slow pace. There's a lot of room, literal time, seconds, between each chord hit. It's a song that doesn't really want to get anywhere too quick, but is interested in laying down the foundations, the groundwork for what the song is going to be built on top of. It is a lot of feedback. And that's it. In a lot of ways, it's an introduction to part 2, which I feel is a bit more, I don't want to say focused, but traditional. In fact, in a lot of ways, part 2 is even unfocused. Once we get out of the transition phase and we begin playing this bluesy rock stuff, which was probably about minute 2 into part 2, from here on, we just had a jam session. There's about 13 minutes of bluesy guitar work in here, lots of bends, lots of melancholic musical ideas, and this is all played on top of a semi-driving drum part. It has a little bit of momentum to it, but again, we're kind of working with something a bit slower here as far as tempo is concerned. Some bass work, and noise. The noise is mostly ornamental. It starts out every once in a while and becomes more frequent as the solo section progresses on. The solo itself doesn't really go anywhere. It always loops back in on itself. That is to say, most solo sections are going to be a tight chordal loop. and that the chords are maybe a 4 chord, maybe an 8 chord loop, that at the end you're always going to go back to the beginning. But musically, you can actually use that and create or pull notes from other chords, or even start on different parts of the chord rather than starting on the root of the chord. Maybe you'll start on the third or the fifth, and this is going to create movement, forward progression in your melodic storytelling. They don't do that here. The guitarist always returns back home at the end of the chord progression when the chord goes back home. It's very cyclical. It's never interested in moving forward. It's never interested in progressing. It is a Groundhog Day scenario where the guitarist keeps living the same 16 bars over and over and over and over. Minor variations here and there, changing up a lick or something like that, but never really progressing to a next idea, a next feeling, a next concept. It is sort of like, what are they called? Like a practice CD that just plays a 4 chord loop over and over for you to practice soloing over or noodling on top of. It's not really designed to progress anywhere. It's just designed to be it, so that you can get comfortable and familiar with that sound. That's what this feels like. Not that it's designed to be practiced on top of, but that's just that the band isn't interested in going anywhere with it. And it does feel very jammy, non-directional. There's no destination in mind. There is just the journey, and even the journey feels a bit static. I wrote down like sitting within its own weight. That's how I described part 2 to myself. It just wants to wallow. Wallow? Wallow. I know how to spell it. How do you say that? It wants to wallow in its own depression, in its own weightiness, in its own whatever. It is not a happy area. It's definitely melancholic. The bluesiness leans into that, but it's also very weighty and slow, and it just feels like being stuck within your own darkness. It does lead into something with a little bit more energy in the final minute and a half, pulling into part 3, which was fantastic. I mentioned that we kind of had a metallic thing going on there for a little bit, and then it turned into a pretty straightforward grunge track. We had the aggressive vocals, we had some, not really guitar licks, a lot of chordal stuff in here, really presenting something heavy and angsty. The vocals were yelled. Eventually we had a second vocal off to the left, I think it was. And it was sort of doing counterpoint. It was wonderful. Very, well, I think sonically, it's noise rock, right? Maybe noise metal, depending on how you want to classify that guitar tone. But I think when you ignore a lot of the noisy elements and you just focus on the driving drum idea, the funky bass lines, the angst of the guitars and the vocals, it's kind of radio grunge in that manner. I think it's a very palatable sound, and for a song that 80% of it was not really my cup of tea, I found something I really liked in this, and I think that speaks to its palatability, but even more so how mainstream this moment is. But like I said, it is surrounded by and augmented by more noise and compression and static sounds. It's not completely something that I think is radio friendly, but as far as everything else in this track, by contrast, this was the most palatable thing I've ever heard. I wrote down noisy blues metal with tons of groove, very grungy. And I loved this section. You know, if I ever came back to Feedbacker, which I'll be honest, I don't think that's going to happen, part 3 would be it. And I might even skip the first minute or so, which feels like part of the interlude, because the end of part 2 also had a weird metal bit that didn't really play into the rest of that blues rock stuff. And so the end of part 2 and beginning of part 3 work together into this more metallic sound that helps to transition but doesn't really feel at home with either thing it comes from. So I might even skip that since it's more interlude-y than anything else. And really, like I said, 4 minutes in part 3 is very palatable. And I find it interesting that that was sort of pocketed in there because you don't really get that anywhere else in this track. Well, 4 minutes out of 44. Yeah, so about 10% of the song, give or take. It's just wild. Oh, jeez. But I liked part 3. I did. Now, part 3 ends with a big ending. Guitars just pick one chord and strum it over and over. The drummer hits anything that they can as often as they want. It's your typical big rock ending you're going to get at the end of a big concert, right? Minus, the guitarist just shredding for no reason. This takes us into part 4, which continues that, but allows a reverb to occur over it until we have layers and layers and layers of this playing whatever you want, creating a wall of noise. Usually I use the term wall of sound, and I think that's still applicable here, but it's not really designed to be listenable in any way. It ends up just becoming static noise in a sense. That's really the only thing I have written for part 4. That's it. That's all that part 4 is. Eventually that diminishes down a little bit and we focus on less just make whatever noise you want sounds, but we stick with the idea of noise, of just creating sound. A lot of it drony, a lot of it compressed and gritty, dissonant. What I think is the worst part of part 4 and what caused me to turn the volume down so often is just how frequently it emphasizes terrible frequencies. Whenever you're EQing music, what you're basically doing is either bringing specific frequencies or pitches or sound, however you want to focus on that, into more focus, or dampening them and diminishing their presence. There are what is called harsh frequencies. They kind of work all over the place depending on your room, what type of room you're recording and what type of instrument you are recording or what kind of sound you're recording. All of this can create unwanted frequencies, things that just don't sound great in the mix. But particularly what we have here, I think, is something a bit more objective, which is just really shrill sounds at a really high frequency and then just dialing that in and focusing so much of the space on that. It becomes, to me at least, painful to listen to. I usually listen to music for the channel from Spotify because it's pretty all normalized, which this one is. Same volume as pretty much everything else. My DAC is at 50% volume and Windows is at 24 volume. That is a pretty good set for anything I listen to on Spotify. I dropped this down to a volume of 2 on Windows. I don't touch the DAC too often. I mean, that's a massive drop in volume. And the thing is, it still ends up being quite shrill. I don't know why they did this. I can appreciate creating noise, sonic disruption, the artistic element of chaos. I don't have that strong of an appreciation for painful music, not emotionally or mentally painful, but physically painful. My ears hurt while listening to that. It's artistic expression. Sure, I can get behind that. But I also greatly value the health of my ears. Not just because it's my job, but also because I do listen to a lot of music in headphones, particularly because of doing these reactions. But still, I did not enjoy that. And maybe it's different with speakers, where the sound isn't directly blasted into my ears, and it has time to move through the world or whatever. Sound waves hit me a little less impactfully. I don't know the science between sound behind sound. Um, like I said, maybe that's a little different. In headphones, though, that was just absolutely unbearable. And like I said, I ran it down the volume too. It was right on the cusp of not being able to hear it at all, and that was the only way I could do. Otherwise, I would have just had to skip it. And I don't think it's very fair to Boris. I don't think it's fair to y'all. It's not really fair to me either. I lose part of the artistic element here, which I've already kind of tampered with that as it is with the volume. But yeah, that as much as I don't like drone or walls of sound or just noisy music in general, that crosses a line for me. And then it takes us back to part one, or technically part five. We keep that high frequency focus from part four, the squealing guitar tones, but we bring back the drum pattern from part one and eventually put a descending guitar line in that I don't recognize from anywhere else. I think it's interesting that the song does come full circle in a sense. It showcases a linearity to the entire song, where even at the end we are still progressing forward with part four's ideas and bringing those to a head, wrapping the song up. But for the first time, I think, in the entire track, we're bringing back an idea from a previous moment. It's a nice way to wrap it up, I think. But I don't know why. What is the purpose of this hint at a loop? What is the purpose of bringing that drum part back? Is it simply just to create a nice punctuating idea, to reference something from earlier, as any good story tends to return back to a state of some sort? There's always a reference back, whether it's just to show growth. This is where I started, and you come back to it realizing that you're a different person now. We often see this in fantasy adventures where the person leaves home, goes on an adventure, grows as a person, and returns home to find their place in their society different. And so it could just be a really nice way to cap this song off, but I wonder if there's more thematic purpose to it. And the reason why I don't really have an opinion about what this thematic purpose might be is because I don't really understand this song at all. You know, I can take the broad strokes here, starting off super small, getting to an overwhelming size, exploring this heaviness and darkness, going for something a bit more angsty, turning that angst into destruction for part four, and then reining it all back in. This general idea of growth from softness into destruction can represent so much. It could just be an overwhelming rage, which it could be representative of natural things. We can look at it as the earth fighting back. It could just be someone having a bad year, and this is the last straw that broke the camel's back, and they're just raging out now. It's such a broad strokes painting that it could be overlaid on a lot of different stories and still be accurate. There's nothing in here that particularly stood out to me as something that hyper focused on a concept, and it's why the ending kind of eludes me. I don't know what it's saying to begin with, much less what it's supposed to mean in the end. Oh, there were two tracks with lyrics, right? The end of part two and then the grunge part of part three. Going back to the idea, we'll hit lyrics in a second. Going back to the idea of increasing intensity over time, I think it's also interesting to point out that tracks one, two, and five have sort of a slow tempo to them. Track three is driving. It's the only part that has any sort of momentum boost to it, and it leads into part four, which is timeless. I don't really believe there is any perceived tempo there. They may have written one down if they do sheet music, but at the end of the day, there's no real pulse in there to be found to determine a tempo. It's either a destruction and a removal of time, or it is all time together at once. I don't really see it on anywhere in between those two extremes. And I think both of them can represent something interesting within this general concept of rising intensity that forms into a weighty sorrow, into an anger, into destruction. Let me check out some lyrics on this, see what's going on, and then we're going to wrap this one up. All right, so lyrics. Part 2. There's only 2 stanzas, 6 lines. Part 3 is 3 stanzas, 10 lines. Part 2 says, the crisis leaves behind beautiful remnants. In last night's dream it appeared, a shining, glistening sign, and I touched it. The end makes itself known, and everything is beginning to roll over. This isn't in English, though, just to let you know. This is a translation of the song. But it speaks about something destructive, a crisis, leaving behind beautiful remnants. And that the end makes itself known and everything is beginning to roll over, to me speaks about rebirth after destruction, which kind of ties in a little bit to what I was talking about earlier. I don't think it's a perfect parallel to my interpretation of the song, but I can see parts of this in it, right? I do think it's interesting, though, at this point, to me, the crisis hasn't begun yet. We had a lot of feedback in part 1, and part 2 was very bluesy and sorrowful, but a crisis? To me, part 4 is where the destruction of the crisis happens. So either I have a very different read on part 2 than Boris intended, or there's a cyclicality element where time isn't linear in this tale, which I think would be pretty cool because music is linear by definition. It's sort of the problem with storytelling at all. And it's very interesting to tell nonlinear stories within a linear format, such as film or music or, well, not so much novels, because you can do choose your own adventure books and mess with lineality that way. Linearity? That's the word. Lineality. What am I even on? But it does talk about, like I said, growth and rebirth and beauty after catastrophe. Part 3 says many layers of scenes reflected in the mirage. They stay here, a blurred shade. They just stay here. Must shoot at the season of the fangs that has forgotten to make a decision. Fragments have come together to become me. Millions of me. Millions ways of living. I really like this. I don't know what all of this is about. The mirage of many layers, although that could be the chaos that we hear in part 4 in a more literal sense. But shooting the season of the fangs and how that becomes a forgotten decision, I don't understand that. But the idea that out of all this beautiful destruction that happens, through all of that, those pieces came together to form me. Not me as I, as singular, but me as everything. It could be a reflection of humanity. Through all of this destruction, we have us, but it could also just be life in general. And kind of views the destruction as necessary to creating where we are today. I think there's beauty in here, even if I don't quite grasp the exact intention. The sheer concept here of destruction creating beauty and rebirth and growth out of that and forming, what is beautiful, but it's us. Again, not us just humans, but us, the earth. It could be a song about the Big Bang Theory for all I know. And through all of that clashing and chaos, it creates order. Just in this solar system, we have planets that orbit in a natural way. We have life on Earth, at least. All of the factors that were necessary, the chaos that was necessary to create life here, that evolved into humanity. It is wild. It's wondrous. And in the classical version of the word, it's awesome. Maybe that's what this song is supposed to be about. I don't know. Like I said, it's kind of vague. Even the lyrics are vague. There's birth, there's rebirth, there's destruction, there's growing back out of that. It could also, much like the music, be applied to a lot of concepts. But I do see how the two interlock and work off of each other, even if I think the ordering is a bit interesting. Some of these lyrics I feel like maybe should have come up in part 5, but again, maybe the storytelling isn't linear on this song. Those are my thoughts. Boris's feedbacker. I hope you all are happy with this frickin' 75-minute reaction to drone, to noise. I give you all a hard time, but I enjoy it, right? If I didn't, I wouldn't be doing this. It is artistic. There's a lot of cool things in it, even if it is not my cup of tea casually. And as usual with something like this, I'm glad I've listened to it once. Even if it's not something I plan to come back to, it was still worth getting time to experience it at least once. But yeah, those are my thoughts. What are yours? What did you think of this song? Is there anything that stood out to you on this? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said, or correct me on, or just give me your own interpretation about this track? Let me know. Put all that stuff down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.